What to play against the Nimzo Indian? Nimzo Indian is proper Grandmaster opening, one of the great opening systems of modern chess. I say modern, I mean people have been playing it for 100 years, and it's still a very sound and successful defence to the d-pawn opening. And given that, I think we're going to be lucky if we hit on a system which guarantees white an advantage. Otherwise, blacks wouldn't play this line. So I think at best we're going for a position perhaps with a slight advantage, or just a position that you're happy to play and that you know how to play better than black. Black's key idea in the Nimzo, or one of the key ideas, is to take this knight on c3, double our pawns, and even if they give up the centre, so we can occupy the centre with pawns, the whole pawn mass gets blocked and blockaded and attacked. Restrained, blockaded and destroyed, says Nimzovich. So this is not an easy defence to play always white. Sometimes when you think you're doing well by playing moves like e4 and f4, then black will hit back in the centre with pawn moves, and you can find yourself suddenly your pawns stop rolling forward and you're just defending pawns that are too far advanced. So how do you play? Well, I think one recommendation I think I'm happy to make is the classical Nimzo Indian with queen to c2, which obviously takes away one of black's key ideas of doubling the knight, doubling the pawns on the c file, although that sometimes still happens. And black's, this is a very unforcing move, so black's got lots of alternatives here. We'll take them fairly briskly, one at a time. b6 is one of the easier ones to understand and to play against. I think white should play e4 pretty quickly. Having said you don't want to move your pawns forward and get them stuck and blockaded, if you think that the bishop is coming to b7, then bishop to d3, c5, d5, queen e2 threatening to take several times on d5, but knight e2 cuts out that, and this position is very good for white. Stockfish says +2. Goodness me. So it's a very fine position for white. This poor old bishop is completely blotted out of the game, and white has a very fine position. So after e4, certainly bishop to b7 is rubbish, and trying to blockade on the dark squares with c5, I think well, a couple of things are okay here, but let's do d5 again. So we're actually agreeing to be blockaded on the dark squares, I guess, but we are blotting that bishop out of the game. We do have lots of extra space here. Queen e2 again, the same idea. Takes on d5, takes on d5, d6, and we've just got more space, and we're likely to pick up the bishop pair. Bishop to d2, castles, and f3, keeping that knight out of e4. So this is a nice position for white. Stockfish says white has a small advantage, and if bishop to a6, making use of the b6 move, which is otherwise a waste of time, bishop to a6, we might have some hopes of playing an attack on this square. Not that we can move our knight there yet because of the pin, but actually, well, okay, let's castle. Let's give up that c pawn, and after knight to g3, white has an excellent position. Black can, I guess, try and pinch that d pawn. So, I mean, here white is 2 pawns down, but Stockfish says that they're +3 ahead. That's to say they've got a rook's worth of activity and compensation in this position for the pawns. You've got a very open position, very well developed, and Stockfish loves white's position here. Knight f5 is coming, with advantage. Yeah, so just knight f5 here, but we're attacking all sorts down the d file, and this is very good for white. So that's b6. I think that's probably the easiest one to deal with, and probably the worst move here. What else could black play? Well, let's try knight to c6. This is the Zurich variation, which is often recommended, trying to blockade on the dark squares, which is, I think I've probably recommended this before if you're a Nimzo player. Knight f3, d6, and now bishop to d2. If black is going to blockade on the dark squares with these sorts of moves, what we want is to try and get a bit of piece control of e5, so a3, and we are trying to control this square, e3, and now some analysis goes a5, e5. Now we'd like to keep things closed if we can, but actually d5 here, and that poor old knight's got nowhere sensible to go. So we'll have we'll take the space, and having said we don't want our pawns to get all blocked and stuck and attacked, so we'll keep the position a little bit open and flexible. We takes on c6, takes on c6, bishop to d3 and castles, and I think white's position's fine here. All you've got going for you is the bishop pair, but that's enough. That's enough to play for an advantage with. It's actually enough to win the game if you're smart in the end game. This position's pretty good for white. Stockfish says about half a pawn, and that's not bad. What do we score here? Well, actually, every game I've got on the Advanced database here, namely 2, the white has won. So that's good good enough for white. Alternatives for black here, going from left to right again, we'll try c5, and if white plays c5, well, actually that's hit our weak point. Having moved our queen to c2, the d4 square is weaker, so d takes c5, and now the best move here is castles. One of the main lines for black is to castle on move 4. This gets to the same position. Can play him in either move order, and we're going to push the bishop to take on c5. And now a couple of lines of analysis. b6, and we'll put the bishop on f4 this time. Usually it goes to g5, but f4 in this line. Rook to d1. So looking at that, black backward d pawn, knight to c6, b4, and e4, suddenly gaining space, and this position is better for white. Still very playable for black. I mean, there's not huge disadvantages to the black position. That d pawn looks very hard to attack, and but white's just got more space and an easy game, fairly easy game to play. Alternatively, instead of b6, we can go knight to c6, and now we do play bishop to g5. And one line of analysis goes knight to d4 takes, e3, and now queen to a5, hitting our bishop on g5 and threatening to double the c pawns. So we'll take on d4 and invite an exchange of queens. And in this position, again, white has an advantage. We don't have the bishop pair, but we do have a much better bishop. We've got no weaknesses. Black seems to have got some weaknesses. Not an easy position for black to handle, and white has a cheerful plus. Not an exciting game necessarily with the queens off, but this is easier for white to play. Another hit in the centre, d5. And now if we take, which I recommend you do, although actually a6 is a perfectly reasonable alternative, c takes d5, and now black can capture in 3 ways, only 2 of which are any good. Don't capture with the knight. We can capture with the queen. Now this is quite a quiet line, particularly if we allow Ramanujan's line with knight f3 and not queen f5. So let's play e3, so that now if queen to f5 we can play bishop to d3, and now c5 hitting back in the centre, bishop to d2, takes and takes. We'll keep our bishop pair after knight to c6 with bishop to c3, and after castles, knight and f3. Black's maybe has a slight lead in development, but we've got the 2 bishops, and that may be enough. It's not a terribly. We're not going for a huge advantage with this queen to c2 line. We're just going for a small edge, and there is one. That's quite a nice position to play for white. And if instead after c takes d5, e takes d5, Familiar bishop development on g5, and black hits back fiercely with c5, g5, knight e4, and now this is tough to get an advantage. It's after e3, queen a5. This position was chosen by Nigel Shorts in a couple of games against Garry Kasparov in their '93 title match, and it's not bad for black. I mean, obviously Short thought he could equalise, although I think he lost games here. Knight e2 is a try, bishop e5 is a try, and I guess the best try for an advantage here for white, only a small one, mind, is rook to c1. There is an alternative here which I'll point out. After knight e4, you can castle queenside, and one of the ideas behind this move, and there's really the only reason I'd recommend it to you is to play, is an exchange sacrifice. Exchange sacrifice, you say? Well, just watch. Takes on c3 and now f3, and if white's allowed to capture on c3 with a pawn, with a queen instead of a pawn, we're going to be doing quite well. But black's got this spoiling move, bishop to d2 check, and after takes and takes and takes, we've sacrificed the exchange, and after bishop to e6, h4, g4, bishop to d6, Stockfish says the position is equal. Well, it's a funny sort of equal, isn't it? I mean, black's got an extra pawn's worth of material, but we've got an extra pawn's worth of activity, even though most of our pieces aren't developed, which is, you know, because we're boss of the dark squares. And this isn't a bad way to play, I think. I don't think this is easy for black at all. So if you fancy this, and I think this is a reasonable way to play, I'm not sure where black's going to castle. I don't know if they're planning to castle kingside anyway, but this looks quite cheerful to me as a way to play for white, and could be tried. Got a little surprise weapon for you. I like the activity. So that's d5. Lastly, before we hit the main lines with castles, d6, and I think that's probably quite a smart move by black, keeping things flexible and probably intending to blockade on the dark squares. Bishop g5 as usual, I mean, although bishop to d2 is okay. Bishop to g5, and now c5 I think doesn't quite work. If we take and play a3, I think either queen a5, bishop to d2 is good for white. Black's going to be obliged to take at some point on c3, and we have a perfectly okay position for white. Well, but Stockfish says about a pawn's worth of advantage. So that doesn't work so well, and after a3, bishop to a5 and castles queenside, again we've managed to have smooth development and fast development, and black's position doesn't make a huge amount of sense. Castles in some of these lines got a bad reputation when Botvinnik beat Keres with it in an old game, but in this position I think castling looks fine. So c5 doesn't work, but it might be okay, or at least fairly okay, if black tries to prepare it with knight on b to d7, and after e3, c5, bishop to d3, queen a5, knight e2, takes, 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 we've got an unusual position where white has given up the bishop pair, although we're likely to get that dark squared bishop back, and you just got a solid game, nice development, small plus. I think that's probably all there is to say about that. It just dawned on me I might have overlooked a line earlier on when I was talking about b6. So follow me again with d5, queen e7, takes, takes, d6, bishop d2, castles f3, and I said bishop a6 was the move. I mean, that's probably the most common move here. Not that this is a very commonly reached position, but there's a couple of guys, Tang and Firouzja, who've been teasing each other with this position for quite a while, and I think Firouzja really likes knight bd7, and I expect after castles, black's got a small disadvantage, white's got a tiny plus, but it's only a tiny plus. So I think this is the best way to play for black, and it's it's a playable position for them. White doesn't have a huge advantage; they have a small advantage, and that's perhaps the best we can hope for as white. So that's everything apart from castles. So let's look at castles. I mean, this is the main line, and it's the Nimzo Indians, so goodness knows how to get an advantage here. There's 3 Grandmaster DVDs out on this line, one of which I own. There's Kazimjanov's one. There's one by Jan Gustafsson, which is the one I've got, and there's the new one by Nick Pert, which I've seen the headlines of, but I don't actually know the lines he recommends. Except to say, Kazimjanov recommends A6 here. I think Gustafsson likes knight f3 here, awaiting developments, and Pert likes e4, which is the one of the later and more fashionable lines here. Well, there's plenty to look at. There's plenty of old theory to look at if you think you like the look of a3 or knight f3. And I've got some more analysis on that, either of those coming out of my ears. But there's a sharp game played here that I picked up from Chess Publishing between David Howell and James Adair, which continued d5, and we get to a mainline position with e5, bishop to d3, and now knight e2 or knight to f3 are played. I've heard knight f3 described as better, but let's go. We might come to the same position after takes and takes. Knight d7, hitting our e-pawn. Bishop f4, protecting it. Queen to h4, hitting our bishop, forcing the weakening g3, and now queen h5. If queen h3 here, I think just castles, and it's a mess. But I mean, I quite like white's position here. After queen to h5. And you'll see Stockfish is being very stubborn about calling this position dead equal. And I expect after castles, I mean, equal is what it is, but the latest idea is to play h4, threatening to trap the queen and keeping the game and possibly your opponent off balance. So what can we do here for, say here for black? 3 moves to play: knight takes e5, f6 and knight ec5. After f6, I think takes and f3 is the way to play. We sacrifice a pawn after g5, bishop e3 takes, and but white should look forward to playing this position. After takes on h4, we've sacrificed 2 pawns, but after castles, I mean, Stockfish says dead level, but what that means is you've got 2 pawns worth of attack, and I don't think this is a comfortable position for black to play at all, even if it is theoretically, your pawns are not worth. Sorry, your pawn, the pawns that you've lost are quite exactly compensated by how much activity you got. But I don't see any black pawn making a run for it in the end of the game here. I mean, those doubled H pawns are rubbish. That isolated D pawn in the middle of the board is going nowhere. So for the next part of the game, it's all going to be about white's activity and white's attack. And you've got more activity and more attack, and I imagine you should look forward to this type of position. If not play a3 on move 5. Knight ec5 is another way to play, so I'll hang on to our bishop, hit the queen, and queen g6, and I don't find anything better here than to play takes and takes, but that is fine. Takes, and now the analysis that I've seen on this position suggests that white should play king to f1. I can't find any games in this position, but the king to f1 was recommended. But with the position on the board, Stockfish really likes knight to b5, just being a nuisance, threatening to come into c7, forking the rook and pawn. So that's another way to play. So that was knight to ec5. We've looked at f6, but the best move probably, played in the most recent game and recommended by the dreaded Silicon Machine, is knight takes e5, which looks like it might lose a piece, and indeed it does, but black can probably get it back. Bishop e2, knight g4, bishop takes g4, queen takes g4, f3, picking up a piece, but queen h5, g4, queen g6, takes e4, and now e5. And with this is an innovation by James Adair against Howell. It's the computer's main line and the best move. And if bishop takes e5, then just rook e8, and I expect black's a bit better, with lots of chances against white's king stuck in the middle. Lots of pawns to take, and I don't think white's comfy here. So if the king's stuck in the middle, let's whisk it away with castles. Still about an equal position, but obviously who's got the better attacking chances? Clearly white's got a kingside attack in mind, and that may yet come to something. Takes on f3, knight f5. I mean, goodness me, everything's hanging, but takes and takes is probably the best move. And now I think white still has prospects of an attack down the king side, and because club players are so rubbish at attacking, you may get away with this. But the two moves played in the game, next two moves, were queen to g4, bishop e3, and bishop to d4, and I suspect both of them were inaccurate. White has a small advantage here. I think instead of bishop to d4, d4 was better with an equal game, and instead in this position, instead of queen to g4, queen to a6, transferring the queen to the other side, and again this is about equal. But what black needs to know a lot of theory and remember a lot of moves to get this far, and even if black does get this far, I think white's still got this punch up their sleeve of attacking the king, and you know, and there may yet be some wrinkles that have yet to be found. But that's analysis, I think, as it stands as of a year or two ago. I haven't found any more recent games than that, and this new h4 idea may be the way to keep some life in their position. But if this seems an awful lot to learn and too much to cope with, then I say there are plenty of alternatives for you to play on move 5, knight f3 and a3, both perfectly reasonable tries for white. Anyhow, I hope you got something out of that, and all the moves are on a Lichess study somewhere, and see how we do. Bye for now.